Okay, great. Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. Um, so our guest today needs no introduction. We've all seen him, read him in various capacities as a star journalist, a food critic, and a talk show host. Veer writes a column, Rude Food, in Hindustan Times Brunch magazine, which is also a book published by Penguin in 2003. The book has won the Gourmand Award as the best food literature book. He's also been given the Best Food Critic Award from the Indian Culinary Foundation, and we are honored to have him with us for the second time at Hoshiarpur Literary Society. Though again, behind the screen, and we would really want him to come down to Hoshiarpur very soon. In conversation with Veer, we have Mr. Khushwant Singh, he's the State Information Commissioner, Punjab, and a well-known author, as we all know, and they'll be talking about food and everything culinary. So I won't take much of your time, and I'm just going to give the mic to Khushwant, and here we begin. Am I audible?
Yes. Hi, Veer.
Yes, hey, Khushwant, how are you?
Very well. Such a pleasure. I mean, I'm seeing you on the screen again and again, but we need to get this going.
I know. Well, the last time, you remember, I nearly came to Hoshiarpur, and then there was very bad weather, and then we couldn't land. So we ended up doing it like this. So I think that seems to be my destiny with Hoshiarpur, that we only seem to have virtual meetings.
No, we shall, in fact, and we'll ensure that the Chief Minister's helicopter flies, which didn't happen last time. Yeah. And before I start this conversation, Sanai, if you would also mention the book, Veer's latest book.
I'll mention it. It's easy enough. It's the first one which she mentioned, which got the Gourmand Award, was called Rude Food. It was a collection of rude food columns. A second collection was published last year by Penguin, called, oddly enough, not More Rude Food, which is what I wanted them to call it, but the Indian Pantry. And that's in the bookshops now. The Gourmand Award for this year has not yet been announced, but the book is nominated for that as well. And it won a version of the Gourmand Award for Best Food Literature Book in India, which frankly is not saying a lot, but hopefully we'll get somewhere on the international list as well.
Thank you, sir.
Just to begin my little introduction about Veer, in the sense, that he's not merely just a food critic. I mean, the amount of literature that Veer's created, I think that's monumental around food. When he started working in 1979. And in fact, there was a time I was reading as part of your introduction in Rude Food that you actually had a pseudonym as Vikram Sinha.
Correct.
For 3-4 years, you wrote a food column, and basically that was to kind of beat the entire corruption and the whole freeloading food critic system, and you started with this. So how do we start? I'm going to start about, how much ever we are talking about food and whatever you've written about food, it's all been in good times, great times, food industry blooming, but suddenly we are in these times when, hunger around us is really, really kind of staring us at a face, especially with the migrant issue. I just want to start with actually on that note, that when you write your column, do you reflect differently right now in the times that we are in?
It's an interesting question, Khushwant, because when the lockdown started and I saw pictures of migrants on social media, not on television, because television had blacked them out, a certain guilt struck me. Could you really write about good food when there were people out there on the streets, people who'd been uprooted? They were carrying all of their possessions in one little cloth potli or one paper bag. And could I write about nice wine, nice food? And I decided that in all conscience, I couldn't. So for at least 6 weeks, I didn't do any food type columns. I did columns on the future of the restaurant industry. I did columns on what you could do within your homes during the lockdown. I did general columns about hotels. And then I have two columns. I have a column called The Taste, which is on hindustantimes.com, and Rude Food, which you referred to, which is in Brunch. So that's what I did in Brunch. And The Taste, I turned into a sort of political current affairs column and stopped writing about food. But this went on for like 6 weeks. And I had imagined, as I imagined, had us all, that in 6 weeks the lockdown would be over. The migrants would have been rescued, sent home, given something. Sadly, the problem continues. But after about 6 weeks, because I got so many protests from people, I said, okay, I will take into account the special circumstances we are in. But at the end of the day, you and I do have to eat. So it's foolish to pretend that out of sympathy for the migrants, we are starving ourselves. So I've resumed writing about food, but you're absolutely right. It was a difficult decision. And for a long time, I didn't do it.
Right. This takes me to the second question, the other extreme of the lockdown period. I ever in history, mankind has cooked and experimented so much with food at home, uh, especially baking or loafing, as I call it. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm sure you also must have indulged in it, even actors like Diljit Dosanjh are on it, and the chef is the new hero on Insta for everyone. But do you think this cooking and tasting by families will trigger a sort of a renaissance in food? In the sense, a major shift is happening as we look at food, its recipes. It has made us healthier, taste-wise, it's better, and obviously light on the wallet.
Yeah, I mean, I have sort of several views on this. The first is that one of the most distressing things about development, and perhaps an inevitable consequence of it, is that people had stopped cooking. We went out, or when we ate food at home, we ate simple convenience food. We didn't really care. Great dishes of our own cuisines were being lost. They were passed on from mother to daughter or father to son. And basically, sons and daughters really weren't interested or said that they didn't have the time to cook. So they stopped bothering. So that used to worry me. I'm glad now that so many more people are cooking. People are calling up their mothers. They're looking for recipes. They're going on the internet and saying, I remember this dish. Is there a recipe for it? So you're absolutely right. There is a renaissance in cooking. People are spending more time in the kitchen than ever before. And I think that's a good thing. The second part of this is that a lot of restaurants get by on impressing you with dishes which they think are so exotic that you couldn't possibly understand how difficult it is to make them. Actually, they're not so difficult. And because people have had this time, they've gone on the internet, they've seen the recipes, they've seen demos, and they're trying them. So a lot of the mystique, and a word I don't really like, but the sort of difficulty that surrounds difficult dishes, the intimidating nature, is gone. They are now dishes that people understand, that they make themselves. And I think that's a good thing.
I
So
think,
overall, I'm just so happy that people are spending more time in kitchens.
yeah, exactly. I think everyone's now a baker, has a baker in the house. I mean, I don't think so. A lot of people will be going to buy bread and in the sense that,
Yeah.
so
My
it's,
wife is baking falafels tonight, so we shall find out on the subject of baking. Yeah.
so this leads me to the next question. That do you think that these hidden talents, I mean, obviously the hidden talents would have been discovered, and a lot of people would have discovered their culinary skills and all that. And do you think this hobbyist now, this will turn into an entrepreneur soon, and we'll see a new surge of um, you know food places, cafes, and what would be your advice to them? I mean, if such a thing were to happen.
I hope so. But Kushwan, the problem is that if, say, you and I wanted to open a cafe in, say, Delhi, first, now I suppose it may change, but it's difficult, first of all, to find the real estate. Then once you found the real estate, the guy will ask for money in black, which you and I don't have. So it will be difficult to even do that deal. Once you've done that deal, you have to go to the excise department. There, the guy will ask for money. Then the cop who comes to check your place out will ask for money. The SHO will say, you have to pay me every month because the police station survives on money from people like you. So you and I ultimately will be at a loss when it comes to running any kind of operation in the Indian environment. Fortunately, there's a new way out. One of the things I've done over the last few months, actually, even before this lockdown, is encourage people who are cooking and want to sell their food to get to me on Instagram or on WhatsApp, and I get like literally hundreds of people every month writing to me. And often I try their food. And these are housewives, home entrepreneurs, guys who quit their jobs because they don't want to do it, who doing interesting things. And the idea is that because delivery has now become such a big thing, they can cook the food and they can send it out to your homes. It's about 1/4 of the price of, say, a five-star hotel, or even less maybe. And it's often as good, if not better. So the advantage now, because of delivery, is that these people who've practiced cooking now have an outlet, a way to sell their food. And for us, a way of getting very good food at home without paying restaurant prices.
But since you talk about restaurants, what is the future of restaurants in the sense that what will survive, what will fade away, what will emerge, how to resurrect this industry? I mean, I mean, what do you think is the future for the restaurants? I mean,
It's a difficult question, because if you take the present, right, the current situation, restaurants are closed. Many restaurants are losing crores. It's very difficult. For some of them are paying their staff, some of them are just shut down and said we'll reopen when we reopen, and we won't pay rent, we won't pay salaries, we won't do anything. But the people who are conscientious and who have been paying staff, have been paying salaries, are now in deep holes because there's outgoings, there's no money coming in. It will be difficult for them to recover. That's number one. Number two, when restaurants do open, and I hope that sooner rather than later, if you're going to impose social distancing norms and you're going to say 6 feet or 2 meters or whatever, that means you're going to reduce the number of people a restaurant can serve by 2/3. So they're going to get 1/3 of the customers they used to get, which means their revenues are reduced. They'll have to sack cooks, they'll have to sack waiters. You don't need so many people. Can they run those restaurants, pay those rents with just 1/3 of the old revenues? We don't know. There's a movement in Europe. Boris Johnson in England has just okayed it to say that 6 feet is too much. Italy, they've opened with 1 meter social distancing. That might work. There are innovative solutions. In London, there's an area called Soho, which is a restaurant hub. The Soho Restaurateurs Association has said that for the few months following the British lockdown, make the streets around the restaurants, and they're quite small streets, make them pedestrian streets. And we'll take over those streets, put tables over there, and we'll therefore be able to get over this terrible social distancing regulation. I think the British government will agree. Now, if you do things like that, restaurants may make revenues. In India, unfortunately, the problem is that the government acts like the restaurant industry does not exist. The restaurant industry is very ineptly run at an association level, so its lobbying is as good as not there. It's largely worthless. And worst of all, there doesn't seem to be the kind of support for the restaurant industry in India that there is, say, in Italy or England or whatever. People seem bizarrely quite content to let the restaurant industry die. It's a very sad situation for the restaurant industry. So in the medium term, the only hope really is that the vaccines that we've been talking about, and Dr. Fauci, who's President Trump's advisor, said he reckoned by January a vaccine would be widely available. Other people have said even earlier. Once we get a vaccine and we're all vaccinated, then it's pretty much back to normal. And so the restaurants who can make it till the beginning of the next year, I think you're okay. I think life will return to what it used to be before the lockdown. The problem is staying afloat till then.
so, I mean, just a question that came to my mind as you were talking, that there are no lobbies and, like the Western world. And so I think, do you think there's a disconnect between the farmer and the restaurant, I think globally I've seen that restaurants recognize the role of the farmer in bringing food on a plate. And there is this whole farmer lobby that also understands that how the food should be consumed. But here, actually, when someone is on a restaurant, they even don't realize that the food has actually everything there has come from some farm.
I couldn't have put it better myself. Essentially, restaurants are what? They're a way of taking the farmer's produce and getting it to people. But when you listen to restaurateurs, even to chefs, though that's changing now, fortunately, they have no concept of where the food has come from. They have no concept when you're dealing with animals of where the animal has come from. They think that everything comes to them from the purchase department in nice little packets and they make the food. I'll give you examples. Like we eat goat in India, right? When you say mutton in India, it means goat. So Indian restaurant executives are very scared of saying goat, so a dish will always be described as lamb on the menu, even though you and I know it's goat. But let's take goat as an example. Indian doctors will tell you, don't eat mutton. It's really very unhealthy. Eat chicken. These are things they've learned from American textbooks, and they refer to beef. The reality is that goat, which is what you and I eat, is an extremely healthy meat. It's a meat that has a lower fat content than chicken. Chefs don't know this. They pay no attention to where the goat comes from. The goat is now a very trendy animal in America. And if you go to a restaurant that serves goat, you will be told which farm it came from. You will be told the age of the goat. You will be told the breed of the goat. I would be surprised if you could show me 10 chefs in India who know the breed of the goat they're serving. We just don't care. When you ask them about the rice and you ask what kind of rice is it, where was it grown, they have no clue. There's one of the failures in the way we teach catering in this country has been the complete disconnect between the product, the man who creates that product, and the chef.
Exactly, and I think that effort needs to be there. I mean, I realize that, in fact. So I'll come to the my next question. In fact, that is what something I discussed with Nitesh also. That there seems to be this, mass en masse pink slips are being given to uh, people in the hotel industry, and also it's something like the people are losing faith in the hotel industry. It's very, very HRD. It's the people that come and work for it, and also the students, thousands of students who are in the catering institutes. uh, some are interning, and suddenly they see this very dark future, with the hotel industry and the restaurant industry just kind of coming to a standstill. What sort of a future do you
Okay.
see for them?
Okay. A few things. The first is, compared to the standalone restaurant industry, the hotel industry is in a much better place. Its organizations and associations are properly led. They know how to lobby the government. They seem to have a connect with their customers. All hotels survive on customer loyalty. Indian restaurants don't give a damn about customer loyalty and are now paying the price for it. Many chains, and Nitesh is here, so I'll give you the example of Marriott, are very, very people obsessed, which is the chain he works with. They do their hardest to make sure that even if people take temporary pain, they take a pay cut, they try and sack as few people as possible. Now, the hotel industry is a slightly complicated structure, so it's not that easy in that even in a hotel that, say, Marriott runs, Marriott doesn't own the hotel. There's an owner there who owns the property. The owner is making losses. He's keen to cut his losses. He doesn't see why he should pay salaries for people. So the challenge before the international change, the Hyatts and the Marriotts, is can you get your owners to agree to look after your people? It's not always possible, but I'm pleased to say in the case of Marriott and Hyatt, they seem to have managed to do that. As for the longer term thing, whether people in catering colleges should be depressed, I frankly don't think so. Hotels will reopen, I reckon, within a week. The government already has a proposal to reopen hotels. They won't reopen hotel restaurants because that will lead to similar demands from standalone restaurants. But once hotels start reopening, and travel will take time. But again, I believe that by the beginning of the next year, after the vaccine and the hotel industry will be back. I'm overly optimistic. Nitesh will tell you this. The Marriott hotels in China and in Wuhan, which was ground zero for this epidemic, are now running and they're doing 40%
Now, gone through the book. I mean, it's such a fascinating book, and I must say that I loved reading it. And the contempt with which you treat high pricing, snobbery, and corruption in food journalism is absolutely brutal. It's fun, though you use the word a crap a lot. I mean, in a food book,
Yeah.
that's a word which.
Yeah, my wife now edits all of my copy, and she keeps going through it and striking out all the craps and saying,
Craps, yeah.
don't you know any other words? Why do you keep saying so much crap? So I think you have a valid point there.
So I've kind of culled out part which are more relevant to the region, to Punjab. So this is my main question, the star question of the evening, But before that, why is it called rude food?
Oh, it's a very silly name. I think the story is in the introduction. We
Yes.
were revamping the Hindustan Times Sunday supplement when I was the editor. We're talking about 2001, nearly 20 years ago. And I thought food would become very big, a just judgment that I think I've been vindicated on. And I said, you've got to have a food column. And we kept looking for someone to do a food column, and we couldn't find anyone. So they said in the dummy, which was the proposed thing which we had to take to the publisher, why don't you write a column and then we'll see. So I wrote it, and because I was the editor, and it was felt at that time, not by me, but by the paper, that the editor of the Hindustan Times should write political editorials and should not be writing about food. And I had a political column anyway. We used a pseudonym called, I think, Grand Fromage. And ultimately, by the time we were ready to launch the publication, we hadn't found anyone to do the column. So they said, stick with it, call it Grand Fromage. And I reluctantly agreed. And then we had to find a name. And most food columns at that stage were these sort of chamcha columns that took whatever any restaurant PR told you and wrote it down. And I said, let's call it rude food. It's a silly name, but it will suggest that we're not cowed down by restaurant PRs or whatever, and we're honest in our opinions. So in retrospect, the column is not particularly rude any longer.
It says
It's a bit of a silly name, but you're
you
stuck with
picked it up from a dirty magazine.
From a site, yeah, there was a book actually. Since you
Okay.
want me to, I was saying family audience, I won't tell the story, but yeah, there was a picture book called Rude Food, which used body parts to simulate things like food containers. I cannot go into greater detail. And it seemed like a nice rhyming name, so we took it from that book.
Fair enough. And now this is my star question, since we are in Punjab, and how did the dead chicken get into the tandoor? In fact, I'm going to read a small excerpt from your chapter, which says the art of tandoori chicken.
Yeah.
It just says long before the tandoor. So there are two little excerpts actually.
Okay.
One is for instance, here's surprise number one. Unlike the bulk of North Indian vegetarian cuisine, tandoori chicken has a Hindu rather than Muslim origin. Surprise number two, it was actually invented by Punjabis. So this is tandoor. And long before the tandoor became home of the dead chicken, Punjabis installed tandoors in the courtyards of their homes to bake rotis. The history of the tandoori roti is well documented. What is not clear is, when did some bright spark decide to put a whole chicken into the tandoor?
This was 2003. I have since found who the bright spark was and what happened. As you know, Punjabis have always used the tandoor to make rotis, later for naans, and in places like Amritsar on very low heat for kulchas. There was a restaurant called, oddly enough, Moti Mahal in Peshawar in the 1930s. It was owned by Sardar Mokha Singh. And Sardar Mokha Singh had the bright idea of putting chicken in the tandoor. His argument was that it was easy to do. You could put 2 chickens, 3 chickens on a skewer, put them in, and you would have enough food to feed half the restaurant in no time at all. The restaurant became popular in Peshawar, and I think a few other people copied it. Then around 1947, and with the big partition problem, Mokha Singh came across, along with the all other refugees or migrants, or whatever you want to call them. So did various people who'd worked at his restaurant. One of them was a man called Kundan Lal Jaggi, and the other, also called Kundan Lal, confusingly, was Kundan Lal Gujral. They spoke to Mokha Singh and said, why don't we start Moti Mahal in Delhi? Mokha Singh said, I'm not interested. You can keep the name. So they started Moti Mahal in Delhi at a different location, and then it moved to the Daryaganj location, which has now become popular. They started serving tandoori chicken, which nobody had ever heard of before. It became an immediate rage. Pandit Nehru discovered them, started bringing Khrushchev and other foreign state guests, five-star hotels as such in those days. So this became the place to go to. Bit by bit, they invented the whole menu. They were stuck at the end of the day, often with bits of tandoori chicken that they didn't know what to do with. So they started taking the chickens apart, putting them in a tomato and butter gravy, which had the effect of rehydrating them because it was the dry chicken. Once you put it in a wet gravy, it became edible again. That was the invention of butter chicken. Then they took Punjabi dal. You're a Punjabi, you will know that your grandfather would never have made dal, or grandmother never have made dal with so much tomato and all of that. They decided to take the same sauce, that butter chicken sauce, and put it into Punjabi black dal, into maki dal, and created what is now called dal bukhara, or whatever fancy name you want, and which is now served all over Punjab. Though not necessarily in Amritsar, places like Kesar da Dhaba will still serve you the real thing. So they created a whole school of North Indian cooking. Most people don't realize that this is a cuisine that originated on that side of the border in pre-partition, but basically was created by Punjabis in Delhi and in Punjab in the 1950s. So if you go to any Indian restaurant anywhere in the world, the food essentially is Punjabi.
Okay, so they're not the Mughlai or that, what we say. It's
The Mughlai stuff people will now do and talk about Awadh and Lucknow. But if you look at the original restaurateurs all over India, all the restaurants were run by Punjabis, usually Hindus who'd come over after 1947. These are people who started with nothing.
So tandoor
They
is also
created a
thing.
whole industry. Rai Bahadur Mohan Singh Oberoi was a Punjabi. The food he served at his hotels essentially was Punjabi. So that became the standard. So the Indian hotel industry and the Indian restaurant industry are actually Punjab's great contribution to Indian cuisine.
Right. So in fact, tandoor, you also write, is not a very old thing. I mean, we'd be associated with Afghanistan and all, which it is not.
That's interesting because you have it in Afghanistan, you have it in many Middle Eastern countries. Sometimes it's a different shape. It's called a tandil, a tandoor, various things. But now excavations at Indus Valley sites have found clay ovens, suggesting that we were using an early version of the tandoor in 2000 BC. We know, I mean, there's two interesting things about the Indus Valley is we know it's universally established that the chicken, which was a wild animal, was domesticated for the first time in the Indus Valley. Until then, it was never farmed or cultivated. So the Indus Valley gave us, Harappa gave us the tandoor, it gave us the chicken. They had very strong links with Mesopotamia, or Iraq as we'd call it now. There were trade links. The chances are the chicken went from here to the Middle East and from the Middle East to Europe. And so did the tandoor. So maybe tandoori chicken is a forgotten dish which is 5,000 years old. Who knows?
Okay, now I come to the next question, which is actually again your chapter on what you call the Sino-Ludhiana.
Another great Punjabi invention.
I mean, we call it the Indian Chinese, but I'm surprised. I mean, it's just known for Chawla chicken, and how the Indian Chinese is actually the Sino. In fact, there's this very interesting excerpt also, if you allow me to read just two lines from it. Though the Dragon had opened 4 years before the House of Ming, it was the latter restaurant that changed the way we eat Chinese food. Punjabis who had till then stuck to ordering butter chicken and saag paneer at restaurants suddenly realized that there was now an alternative you could eat, masaledar Chinese food.
Correct.
Yeah, this is
absolutely true. Absolutely true. The food, Chinese food in India was made traditionally by the Chinese community in Calcutta. The Chinese in Calcutta are Hakka, which is a sort of gypsy kind of Chinese person who travels everywhere. The Hakka Chinese didn't serve their own food. They served a sort of Cantonese American menu. It was interesting, but there was no big boom. In 1974, the Taj group discovered masaledar Sichuan cuisine, but it was masaledar in a very different way from our masalas, opened the Golden Dragon in Bombay. it was a great success. Other Chinese restaurants, remember that most of India's Chinese restaurateurs at that stage, the furthest east they had ever been themselves was Chaurangi. They were all second or third generation Chinese. So they really had no idea what Chinese food really was like. They started copying the Sichuan food. And the story is, he claims that it's been denied by many people, so I'm not getting into that. It's a man called Nelson Wang, who worked in a restaurant called Frederick's behind the Taj, invented chicken Manchurian because he didn't know what a Sichuan pepper was. He didn't know what authentic Sichuan spices were. He used Indian masalas. 1978, Taj opened House of Ming in Delhi. The moment they opened the House of Ming in Delhi, Punjabis realized that you could have spicy Chinese food. All the local restaurateurs took those dishes. They took Nelson's chicken Manchurian and this red sauce masaladar Chinese that we associate with every restaurant was invented there. Again, largely by Punjabi restaurateurs. It's a bit unfair to give the credit to Ludhiana. I just made up the name because it seemed like a Punjabi name. And when I went to Ludhiana 5 years ago, I was greeted by various people who said, "Welcome to the home of Punjabi Chinese." But I mean, it isn't really the home of Punjabi Chinese. It was invented in Delhi.
All right. And before I get on to the whiskey and wine, and let me ask you this, to demystify this, the sweet truth about chocolate. Rather, you broke my heart when you write that 5-star was hardly a chocolate. I mean, what was I sending to girls in schools?
As long as it worked, why should you care?
It was a wheat bar more than a chocolate.
Yeah. See, chocolate is not an Indian thing. Chocolate was brought to India by the British. Cadbury, which was one of the first and for a long time the only real chocolate company of consequence, tried planting chocolate beans in India, and it took a long time to get it right. In the 60s and the 70s, as global prices of chocolate, of the cocoa bean, went through the roof, they had to invent so-called chocolates that had no real chocolate content. So hence all these 5 stars, which is 5-star was basically a rip-off of the Mars bar. It wasn't as good as the Mars bar, but that's what they were trying at low cost. And all the other things, there used to be one with a wafer inside. I've forgotten all their names. All the Indian chocolates of that era had one guiding principle: try and put as little chocolate as possible.
Okay. And there are these 4 other interesting nuggets in your book, and maybe you can just demystify the 4 of them briefly. I mean, it's as you please.
Somebody called Bunny has just responded. Yeah, Crisp is the chocolate name I was thinking for. Thank you, Bunny. Go on. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Go on. Yeah. It's like, it's the relationship, you talk about maida. In fact, it's interesting. You write that in Bengal, no one even knows about atta, whereas in Punjab, it's all about atta.
Yeah.
But the relationship of maida and the tandoori roti, then then the scandal of the brown bread, the scam of the mineral water, and the mystery of the olive oil. So I just club these 3-4 things together.
Which one do you want to start with?
You start with, I think Punjabis would love the demystifying of the tandoori roti and maida, maybe.
Maida is refined wheat flour. It's not an essential Indian ingredient. The first accounts we find of maida in India are about Delhi Sultanate pre-Mughal period. It came from the Middle East. Indians had no tradition of baking. Even to this day, most bakeries in India are not run by Hindus. It's a big Muslim thing. And now Parsis in places like Bombay, because they understood ovens and they understood baking because of a Middle Eastern tradition that we never had. So maida came with them, and maida has many other uses. It seems more sophisticated. You can do more with it. The taste many people prefer. So maida was gratefully embraced by people in India. A tandoori roti should be made with atta, but people started making it with maida. The naan is not 100% Indian in origin. It comes from the Middle East. If you look at one of its essential ingredients, which is that most naans made everywhere have egg in them. No Indian dish ever had egg. I mean, they go to great lengths to hide this from their customers. But if you're a pure vegetarian and you go to a restaurant and order a naan, the chances are you're eating egg because they all put egg into it. So it's not a traditional through the centuries kind of Indian dish. Bengal, bizarrely, which is basically rice country, has no great tradition of rotis or parathas or anything from the old days, embraced maida as being sophisticated. So the luchis, the Bengali puris, they will make from maida. I have never understood why, but Bengalis love maida. Now, of course, maida is the norm because everybody's baking and it's difficult to bake with whole wheat flour or with atta. Restaurants, I mean, it's much more difficult to make good bread with atta than it is with maida. So as I've written in the book, what they started doing is making the exact same maida toast or whatever they would earlier, but they would caramelize sugar and put it in to change the color. And they started selling it as whole wheat bread or brown bread. I'm told that this doesn't happen so often, but I'm not so sure.
So I
I
think
think
that
it still happens.
the part about the brown bread also you speak
Yeah,
about.
the brown bread is basically now, I mean, hotels all
Yeah.
assure me they've changed, but it was just basically white bread that was colored. The mineral water scam, I think, has now been globally exposed, which is that mineral water is a huge profit center from hotels, for hotels. They buy it cheap and then they sell it at huge markups to guests. In the old days, they would ask you, do you want ordinary water or do you want mineral water? Now, often they just give you mineral water. And if you look like a rich and foolish man, they'll give you foreign or imported mineral water and they'll charge you for it and they'll make a lot of money out of it. So I've said in the book that whenever anybody at a hotel gives me mineral water and charges me without having asked me, I strike out the item from the bill and refuse to pay. If they come to me and they say, will you have normal water or will you have mineral water? I always say, is your normal water safe? And no hotel is going to say, no, our water is dangerous. So they always admit that the water is quite safe and then they don't come back with mineral water.
All right. And now this is a personal question actually, and I hold this against you for
All right.
dismissing Indian whiskey, at least, or the scotch that I buy from the Indian stores. You've kind of really banished that part.
But it's not whiskey. All Indian liquor, all IMFL by definition is neutral alcohol to which they add flavoring. So the same neutral alcohol will make your whiskey and your gin and your vodka and nearly everything else. So, I mean, there is nothing wrong with liking it. I mean, people like all kinds of things. But it's a bit dubious to compare it to whiskey made the right way. That's why for a long time, the only thing that really made sense in India to drink was rum, because our neutral alcohol is made from molasses, and so is rum, which is why Indian rum has always been quite good. But Indian whiskey, with great respect, is not really anything like the real thing.
But you've also said the scotch that we buy, is actually rubbish. It's basically just...
It's changing. It's changing. What used to happen in the old days, where there was such strong import controls on whiskey that a smuggling sector grew up. It wasn't that easy to smuggle scotch. So they started making it themselves. If you went, when I was growing up, to Kabadiwala in Bombay, and you offered him a empty bottle of Black Label, he would give you 10 rupees, which in those days were a lot of money. And what would he do with it? He would sell it to some bootlegger who would then make dubious scotch in some suburb of Bombay and sell it to Bombay's elite, who would love it, not realizing how bogus it was. At one stage, it was said that there was more Black Label drunk in India than was produced in Scotland.
But yeah, you've been a great advocate of rum, actually, if you were to buy an Indian drink here in the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a question as we talk about scotch, what is the role of water in scotch making? In the sense, I feel that since water is distilled, it's overhyped, but does water play a role? I mean, is Scotland...
Damn all. I'm probably going to get into trouble. I made a film for Glenlivet, and Glenlivet is outstanding malt whiskey, he says quickly. And they go on about the water in Glenlivet, which comes from something called Josie's Well, which is a legendary well from which the water comes. But if you see the way in which they filter and they refine the water, pretty much anything that Josie had added from a well is removed. It's the same as any kind of distilled water, any kind of mineral water, any kind of normal water, any kind of water that's been treated or filtered water. So I think because many scotches seem the same to people, they try to find ways of distinguishing them, and water is one easy way of doing it.
Exactly, because I've always said, and no one's believed me, I said that water is largely distilled in alcohol. I
Yeah,
mean, it's the
you're
process.
spot
As
on.
soon
You're
as
spot on.
really,
Makes no
no,
difference.
no difference. Thank you.
Yeah.
And from whiskey, I come to wine. There's this chapter on wine in your book,
Yeah.
and you are really harsh in that
This was in
chapter.
2003. Yeah, the Indian wine
So
industry
has it come?
has
Yeah. So,
improved. It has improved. Indian wine is not as bad as it used to be in those days.
but you've come harsh on the entire wine tasting and all that blah that happens with it.
Yeah. The wine snobbery is nauseating. I mean, people who go on and on about how much they can taste in wine usually are frauds and humbugs. You give them any bogus Indian wine and tell them it's Muta or Rothschild, they can't tell the difference. I'm not. I believe that all this snobbery has taken the fun out of wine drinking. Wine drinking is about enjoyment. It's about friendship. It's about matching it with the food. It's not about showing off.
All right. Uh, I skipped from food to this chapter in your book where you talk that the airline food, how crap is the airline food?
Crap
Uh,
again, that same word.
yeah, that same word. That how crap
Yeah,
is.
but it's really is crap. Yeah.
And obviously, I think a large part of our audiences, they've traveled and they're travelers. And everyone has a story, about swad nahi hai. Someone says, I'll take my pronta still,
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I don't eat on planes. I mean, now I don't know. I don't think
but what makes it,
anyone will be allowed to eat on planes for a long time.
but
But the
what
food,
makes it so?
why is it so bad?
Yeah.
It's easy. If you've ever been to a flight kitchen, they will make, assuming it's a simple thing like rasa aloo, they will make 2,000 to 3,000 portions at one time. Yeah, to some institutional recipe. It's almost impossible when you're cooking in such massive quantities to make anything with any attention to detail. It's even more, it's a curry, it's possible. But even a simple thing like, say, a dosa, which they do for breakfast, they will make 5,000 dosas. So each guy will make a dosa in like 5 seconds or as quickly as he could. So there is no way, almost by definition, that food could be any good. Then there's the price factor. Restaurants will charge you reasonable amounts, but airlines will pay flight kitchens very little. Therefore, at that price, flight kitchens will try and cut as many corners. It might be Oberoi Flight Kitchen or Taj Flight Kitchen or some fancy name, but the food you get will not be Oberoi food or Taj food. It will be low-cost food made in bulk. Then, after that, as if all of this was not bad enough, they will keep that food in various kinds of packaging. And by the time you eat it, it may have been 24 hours since it was made. And it's reheated ineptly in the galley by staff who are just eager to get the damn thing over with, get the service over with, so don't mind burning it, overheating it. So given all of this, if you get good food on an aeroplane, it's a miracle.
Right. And so coming on to bad food, you also mention at some point that hotels assign the worst chefs to banquets. That,
Yeah,
and in fact, I'm reminded of this story by Manjeet Gill. In fact, you refer to him a
yeah.
lot, call him the doyen of, the Indian.
He's my guru when it comes to Indian food.
Right. And in fact, I remember this story. He says, whenever people come to us for marriage and they say that 500 will turn up and it's a marriage season, I always say it's 750 because the people don't realize that people come to ITC to eat. The final
Yeah,
destination is Moria.
yeah.
Otherwise, no one eats. But you mentioned that the hotels assign the worst chefs to.
Well, the Maurya, since you brought it up, is possibly the exception because they know that people come to ITC to eat a certain kind of Indian food. But generally, banquet menus are fixed in advance. You're offered a banquet menu at one price, a banquet menu at another price. If it's a buffet and they are trying to save money, it will be arranged cleverly. Next time you go to a buffet, assuming buffets ever come back, is look at the way in which the high food cost items will be put at the end of the buffet, just before the desserts. The cheaper items will be put at the front. Look at the plates. Often they won't be the same plates you get in the restaurant, but smaller plates. The idea will be that being greedy, you will fill your plate with all the cheap rubbish by the time you get to the really expensive items. And so they will save money. So there's a scam in that There's a scam in Sunday buffets, which is very similar. Why do you suppose every hotel at the beginning puts all these terrible salads, which nobody ever eats at every buffet? Because they want you to fill your plate with them because they're low cost. Why do you suppose at every Sunday brunch, they offer you a choice of fried egg, scrambled egg, etc.? Why? Because if you're going and paying 2,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees, and you're eating a boiled egg, you're an idiot. No, it's a thing that costs them 2 rupees or 3 rupees. So that's how they work.
I agree. I'm glad that I just skipped that salad counter and just
Yeah.
move forward.
Why somebody has just commented, go straight for the seafood,
Yeah.
enter the buffet, look for the lobster, go for the prawns, and then laugh.
Exactly. But one of the questions that's always intrigued me is vis-a-vis, you were in Amritsar also recently.
Yeah.
That why is it that one city has better food than the other? In the sense that, is it the food culture, romance, or like Amritsar just says it's water? I mean, what is the real deal here?
I don't know. I've tried to work it out. I don't think it's water. I think it's much more complicated than that. I've had some bad meals in Amritsar also made with the
Exactly.
same
So
water.
Amritsar, I mean, I'm not very fond of Amritsar food, but still,
But
while we have
Chandigarh, which is not so famous. You live in Chandigarh, right?
I live in Chandigarh.
Yeah. Worst food in Punjab. It's so difficult to have a good meal in Chandigarh. Ludhiana, the food is wonderful. Amritsar, overall, the standards are very high. So it must be the same cooks who go from place to place. So why is food not so good in one city and so good in another city? I don't know. I've given up trying to figure it out.
Okay. And I'm also, kind of always had this question that what is authentic food, in the sense that can a person of a different origin create food of a different culture, or 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 is, I remember at the New York Lit Fest, I was launching my book, and Madhur Jaffrey, I think that's her name, yes. She
Yeah.
was also launching her book, and she says there's nothing as authentic restaurant. The authentic food is actually in the home. Uh,
Even that's not true any longer.
but
I mean,
right.
okay.
But I mean,
But look, what is authentic? I mean, let's take this whole business of a culture and only Indians can make Indian food or whatever. If that was true, then 95% of the Italian food you get all over the world is bogus, because pizza parlors, all of that, that's Italian. Italian at the moment is the number one cuisine in the world, and in terms of number of restaurants, and that's mainly because of pizza. Where are you going to find an Italian making pizza? More Americans make pizza than do Italians, let alone anywhere else, right? So the difference between, I think, French food, everybody cooks French food. That's part of the basic training of every chef. I always think the difference between a great global cuisine and an ethnic cuisine is that an ethnic cuisine is only made by people from there. A global cuisine, French, Italian, is made by everybody. If you look at Indian restaurants in London now, it's so difficult to get visas that more and more of them are using English cooks. Indian accent, probably the best Indian restaurant in London. The kitchen is more than half Brit. If you look at Crickets, which is a popular Indian restaurant, which I like, it was founded by Brits and the food is cooked by Brits. Thai food in London, places like the Smoking Goat or Kiln, it's locals who make it. When a Thai guy or we open a French restaurant in India and the chef is an Indian, we don't think it's odd. So why should we think it odd that Brits are cooking Indian food?
but is it
So
authentic in the sense, why do we I mean, it
yeah,
might be Indian food, but what is authentic?
define authentic. What is authentic?
Yeah,
How
that's
authentic is
exactly.
butter chicken? It has no 500 years of history. It was invented in the 1950s in Daryaganj.
No, for
It's been
example,
through so many changes.
for example, you write in a passage that the North Indians largely go to restaurants to eat food which is not available in their house.
That's right.
With the
Yeah.
same food. So is the food that we cook at home, is that what ultimately comes into this commercial thing and becomes authentic?
No,
or
because
just
there are
because
always in every cuisine great restaurant dishes and home dishes. No Chinese person can make a Peking duck at home, right? Just as none of us really eats tandoori chicken at home. It's the same with the French. The French are the exception. There are people who go French
on my mind. And, as we wind up and we come to the last two questions, there are a lot of these blogging sites that have come up, and there are these n number of food critics. Everyone is just going to a restaurant and writing. What, according to you, is a good food review in the sense that, and what is good food journalism? What constitutes a good review? I mean,
I think basically a critic should remember that his or her loyalty is not to the restaurant, even though they may be hosting him or her. It's to the readers. I think the moment a blogger or a critic loses sight of that, you're in trouble. And secondly, I think it just boils down to experience. If I went to Ethiopia and I reviewed a restaurant in Ethiopia, I would not be in a position to say what is a good dish and what is a bad dish because I don't have a background in their cuisine. Ultimately, the difference between people who talk a lot about food and people who understand it is points of reference. If you've eaten 50 different butter chickens, you know which is the right one or what is wrong with one. If the first place you go to, or you've been to 4 places and you've had butter chickens, are you really in a position to say what is good, what is bad? That's why, compared to critics, I always trust chefs and restaurateurs. They have the background, they know the judgment, they have the judgment, they know the dishes.
but do you have any regret of pushing some nonsensical cuisine in your
like what?
columns?
Which one? Tell me which one.
Anything which you think.
No.
Nothing.
I'm quite careful about not to push it.
No,
Nonsensical
not push in terms of a deliberate push, but what you backed, and because you also, I think, your writing shaped the industry in a certain way.
No, hardly. Hardly. I was shaped by the industry, but no, I think I've avoided all the fads and all the craziness. So I've been actually quite conservative in the stuff I've liked. I have prejudices. I don't particularly like, say, truffle oil or whatever, which is a synthetic oil, which has nothing to do with truffles, which many so-called fancy European chefs use. So I have prejudices, but beyond that, no.
Perfect. I'm on the last question, and in fact, this question had, Vikas Khanna and I had discussed this many years ago, and it stayed with me. And so, do you feel that food is beyond, calories and essential for living? I mean, is it a unifier of people in the sense, if you look at the langar concept, or an Indian going to an Italian restaurant or an Italian coming to, so is it, how do you see it as this one big unifier of humanity?
Look, everybody has to eat, right? If you don't eat, you die. So it's the one thing that we all have to do. We all have to work for it. You don't earn a living, you're finished. But food is the one thing that you have to do that can be fun. So if you eat bad food, if you don't enjoy your food, then you're missing out on a great opportunity. Secondly, as you said, food is about joy. It's about sharing. It's about friends getting together. So food, therefore, should be a unifier. That's why I'm so against food snobbery. That's why I think food in langars or in the dhabas of Amritsar, etc., is often much better, not just because the food itself is good, but because of the atmosphere, because of the spirit. Because food is not just about nutrition. Nutrition is a given. Food is about joy.
All right. Thank you, Veer. Thank you so much. I think we've had a good 1 hour session, and thank you for taking out time. It's such a pleasure.
Anytime, Krishna.
Yes, thank you. And Sana, over to you.
Yes, I think it was a great session, and it just didn't feel like it. We've been talking for about 55 minutes.
Yeah.
So a lot of good things, 5-star mineral water, olive oil, whatnot. So we'll just ask everyone who's attending this session to type in their questions if they have any. We'll be taking relevant questions only. So we have about 10 minutes. So Khushwant sir would be asking the question. If anyone has a question, please type in the chat window.
There are a few questions that have come out.
No, there hasn't been any. I think. Okay. So I have 3 people who want to ask questions.
So why don't you go ahead?
Type your questions.
Why don't you go ahead and ask the question?
Can you just, Mr. Kapoor, can you type your question?
But that was good, Veer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kushwan. You made it very good.
I
Um,
wish I'd.
Mr.
Sorry.
Harkirat Aluwalia, you need to type the question. So
Can't we just ask it?
No, because then it just.
The hands are raised. No? When you raise your hand, the hand raise comes, right?
we'll just keep one moderator for the session. So it'll be nice if you can just type the question. Thank you. Okay, so we have a
There is.
question.
Yeah.
Krishman, you want to take that?
No. You please take it.
Okay, there are a lot of them suddenly popping up. Okay, so I've got a question from Mr. Kapoor, Mr. RVS Kapoor. Why is HR going down? I mean, why are hotel employees not as warm as what we saw in childhood? Okay.
That's, I think, true not just of hotel employees. I think that's true of restaurant employees also. I think because in the old days, hoteliering and working in restaurants was not a very well-paid job. People who joined restaurants and hotels as waiters, servers, cooks, etc., either came from backgrounds where they couldn't get a better job and were very grateful for the job they had. And the second category was people who loved hospitality. Now, as hotels, particularly even more than restaurants, have become better paid jobs, and restaurants too are attracting a different kind of person. You want a smart person who speaks English, can talk to guests. That kind of person can leave you and go and join a call center tomorrow, right? So he's not grateful for the job. He acts like he's doing the restaurant the favor. And because there is no great love of hospitality in his heart, that reflects in the way he treats guests.
Great. We've got another question, Veer. This is for you. So what is your favorite cuisine and do you cook often at home?
My wife cooks at home. She's a very good cook. I'm the world's worst cook, but I'm lucky that I have her. And I have no favorite cuisine. I have no favorite restaurant, no favorite hotel, no favorite cuisine, no favorite city. I just like everything.
So I think that's a great thing with real foodies. It's not like if you're a meat eater, you want a dead animal on your plate every night. And if you're a vegetarian, you should not have a prejudice for non-vegetarians. So a real foodie appreciates good food, be it meat or vegetables or whatever. It has to be good food. Great. So we've got another question. Hi, Veer. How would the buffets look like now, especially the morning breakfast at hotels?
I think the breakfast buffet at hotels is dead for the foreseeable future. Nobody's going to queue up for the egg counter. Nobody's going to eat cold rolls. Nobody's going to stand next to anybody. The hotels that I know are reopening are discussing grab and go breakfasts that you can deliver packets with bread or stuff like that to people's rooms, leave them outside. They can take them as they go. If they do want full room service, they will get room service, but it'll be left on a trolley. They will call you and tell you the trolley is outside your room. You go, you take it in. It'll be completely contactless.
Okay,
There's a
we've
question
got.
by Bunny here.
Okay, yeah. Why don't you take that?
Bunny, I think that question I've lost. I think it's gone on the scroll.
Okay,
I think he is basic. Can you scroll it? Okay. Food is not overrated as such. Sometimes it's the ambience which makes the difference in your taste and feel. What do you feel?
Absolutely. I find it very hard to take people who claim that there's an objective criterion for food seriously. Every meal you have is a combination of different things. If you just had a fight with your wife, the chances are you're not going to enjoy the meal, no matter how good or bad it is. If it's served in really dirty surroundings and you're uneasy about the dogs and cats roaming around, no matter how tasty the food is, you're not going to like it. If the waiter is rude to you, you're not going to like it. Food is about your state of mind. There's an English chef called Heston Blumenthal. Nitesh is gone, but we did this at his hotel. He was cooking at Nitesh's hotel. And after dinner, I did a question answer thing with Heston. And Heston, who's one of the world's greatest chefs, believes that food is about the pleasure center in the brain. So we had a glass, all of us had a glass of wine. So he said some nice things. He tried the wine, isn't it good? So he said, okay, now think of something really bad, something really sad and tragic that's happened in your life. and try the wine. And I swear to God, the wine didn't taste as good. So food is only partly about the chef. It's partly about you and your state of mind.
I've got a question from Bindu Bamba. What do you think of Claude Levi-Strauss that the preparation of food is a form of language that reveals society structure? The more complex society boils, the next level roast and the third smokes. Boiling involves many different mixing. I think I lost the question. Boiling involves many different mixings of different element eats. What is the umami in Indian food?
The what in Indian food?
Some you what's I think I've lost
Umami.
the question.
Is it
Oh
umami?
yes. Yes.
Umami.
I think I've lost
Yeah.
the question. It's
Okay.
just gone.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is very only a Frenchman, and Lord Levi-Strauss is of course Frenchman, could say something like this. The French approach food in various kinds of detail. When you go to a French kitchen and they explain boiling, which is one of the examples there, they will tell you there are 12 different kinds of boiling. The French believe that food should be, or the preparation food should be as complex as possible. And they believe that the complexity of that preparation shows the sophistication of their society. I mean, I can see what he's getting at, but I think that's too French-centric a view of food. Food reflects society, yes, where it's possible to read too much into it.
Okay. We've got a question from Chandni. Hospitality candidates were mostly headed to cruises. What happens now, given the industry has taken a big hit?
That they don't do any cruises and they come back and cook in their own countries and learn how to cook proper food rather than rubbish and cruise ships.
Okay. Which Indian dessert do you think deserves a Michelin star or stars? That's by Abhilasha. This is a question for you. Which Indian
Well,
dessert do you think?
Michelin doesn't give stars to individual dishes, but if I had to pick my favorite dessert, it would be the jalebi.
Oh, lovely.
Okay. There's one question by Dipinder also.
Yes. You want to take that?
No, I'll. Veer, what is the most memorable meal you've ever had and why? Could you share with us what was the menu comprised of?
No one meal, I have to say. There are meals with some good dishes, some meals with bad dishes. No one meal is ever perfect.
And there's this question by
I think there's a
Harkirat.
question
Yeah.
by Bhumika Batra. Why has the desi ghee receded to back to be replaced by olive oil or canola oil? So why not desi ghee for everything?
Because of doctors, because there was a view spread in the 1950s that a saturated fat, and desi ghee is made from milk, and milk is an animal product. So desi ghee, therefore, is an animal product. So there was a view spread in the 50s by doctors that butter, and therefore, I suppose by implication in India, desi ghee, were really bad for you, that they clogged your veins, they gave you high cholesterol. That view has been completely debunked. Even the US government, which spread the original recommendation against saturated fats, now says that of your total blood cholesterol, only about 15% can come from diet. So this whole nonsense about cholesterol-laden foods has been exploded everywhere else in the world. But Indian doctors still tell you have olive oil, which allows these guys to sell this really, sorry, Sushant, crap olive oil to raise their prices and make lots and lots of money. Left to myself, I'll have butter, I'll have desi ghee.
Lovely.
There's
a question.
You can take the last couple of questions. And then,
Okay.
yeah?
Is self-service to a certain extent a new normal in hotels? Would the guests be fine with that to a certain extent?
So this question is by my younger brother who runs a farm stay, very unique boutique farm stay in Hoshiarpur itself.
Yeah, my view on this is no, I don't think people are necessarily going to be okay with self-service. I can understand this whole business of contactless check-in and contactless delivery to a certain extent. But essentially what distinguishes anything, whether it's a homestay or whether it's a deluxe hotel from the other, is the warmth, the quality of the warmth and the way in which you're treated. And you cannot do that as a self-service place. So hotels will have to find a way of keeping the warmth.
Okay, so we've got last two questions, very quick ones, crisp ones. First one is, which Gujarati dish do you recommend? Do you have any Gujarati favorites?
Yeah, but it's not a dish that you find much outside of Gujarat. It's a mixed vegetable dish called undia. So
Okay.
I don't know if that's any help in Punjab, but that's my favorite dish.
And there's a question, would you go with presentation or the taste when it comes to food?
I hate presentation. I find people who focus too much on presentation destroy Indian food. Taste is everything.
All fluff, no content is not your thing.
Exactly.
So in fact, I have a question, Veer, that
Yeah.
do you think that we have started concentrating on flavors much more than taste, in the sense that the biryani that you get is just, I think, rose water, flavors and all that you get?
Yeah, but I think generally the reason why home delivery will score over restaurants when they reopen is that home delivery has no potential for presentation. So the guys who do home delivery, and some of them are very, very good chefs, have to focus on taste. Restaurant chefs are too obsessed with Instagram and how many people will take pictures of their dish and will share it. So they spend more time in trying to make the dish look good than in trying to make it taste.
The last I read that Delhi home delivery, if you want to order Thai food, they'll give you Thai cutlery. They'll have a fancy box that looks like almost like a table mat, and just to give you that experience of the restaurant. That's the new thing coming up. I don't know how well that's
But
received
many
by the
hotel
audience.
chains are also trying to plan that you can do, say, a Dampuk's banquet in your house, and they'll send you, as you say, the cutlery, the crockery. Let's see if it works.
All right, I think
we've had a great session, and we're just in time to wrap it up. Thank you, Veer.
Thank you
for
for
your
inviting
time.
me. I've had a wonderful time. Thank you, Kushwan. That was amazing.
Thank you,
Thank
Veer,
you.
and we should get you to Hoshiarpur now for
Yes.
Finally,
your,
COVID
yeah,
time.
finally for your political column. I love that column
Next.
actually.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. I'm going to
you.
end this
Bye.
meeting now.
Thank you,
everyone
everyone.
for being
Thank you,
part of it.
friends. Thank you,
Thanks
friends.
so
Thank
much.
you, everyone
Bye.
who's
Bye.
attended this. Thank you.